and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. Well, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. We got through it and the show is on. So tonight's guests, we have two of them, is John Sumpel and Jack Roth. They have a film out about abduction. And, if you're a longtime listener, you know that I've been kind of on the fence about that whole situation. It's a pretty compelling film. I did watch it. It's called Extraordinary of the Seeding, and it's coming out on September 3rd, coming right up. And we're going to be talking about that, and also a whole bunch of other things. I'm sure we're going to touch on before them. I do have Alejandro Rojas coming up with UFO updates, and so there's a lot going on in the news. We'll be talking about that. I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show, and anyone can do that. All you have to do is go over to podcastufo.com and check out how to help us out over there. Also, I forgot to mention last week, we have a blog up on Dr. James McDonald and the UFO Problem. That's the name of it, by Charles Lear. A very well-written article. Check that out. That's also over at podcastufo.com. We also have a Facebook site, Twitter, and all that stuff that we're supposed to have. But anyway, that's enough talking for me. Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, as always, Alejandro, as always, we have a lot of fun. So we're coming right up in just a couple of weeks. I will see you out in Phoenix. I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Yes, and unfortunately not both of your guests will be there, but Jack will be there. But John will be there in spirit because they both have a film in the film festival, the one you just mentioned you'll be talking about here. And so good luck to those guys. And it's you saw it. It's a very, very well done film with a lot of, in fact, some of our other speakers are in there, including Richard Dolan, Chase Kletsky. I think Melinda Leslie's in it, who's going to be at the conference as a vendor. So, yeah, it's kind of a cool thing because it's a lot of the people that you know and will see there at the conference. Mm-hmm. So there's stiff competition when it comes to the films. Jeremy Corbell has his two films in there. Many of you are probably familiar with Tim Crawford from UFO TV. He's got a couple films. And now he's sponsored films before, but these are the first he's really directed and produced himself. But they're very well done. So there's going to be some really tough competition there for J3. But they've been winning film festivals all over the country.
That's
so
right.
By now they're used to winning. So hopefully
win.
For them, their winning streak continues.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is happening in general? What's going on?
In general, I wasn't going to talk about a general. Actually, I was going to talk about an admiral. This is something I wrote for the Roswell Daily Record recently. However, I have more pictures if you go to my blog, alejandrotrojas.com, and see it there and links and stuff. But essentially, Brian Bender was at the Aspen Security Forum a couple weeks ago, while many of us were at MUFON, actually. And this is a really important forum at the Aspen Institute with, all of the top-level officials when it comes to defense contractors, defense writers, and many people in the military. And in one of those forums, Bender was actually going to be there to moderate. Of course, he's the guy who is also in an unidentified, and he's broken some UFO stories recently, including the fact that the Navy was rewriting their UFO guidelines, reporting guidelines. Well, in one of the forums, unrelated about China and defense issues related to China, Admiral Davidson, who's in charge of the Indo-Pacific Command, so a big portion of the Navy, was asked by one of the guests about UFOs. The guy was embarrassed when he got up and asked, and he kind of stumbled through the question. He didn't really even get the whole question out. He was just asking about UFOs. The crowd unfortunately laughed, but Admiral Davidson didn't. And he said, yes, we've got new reporting guidelines for UFOs. And he also added this. He said, I want to note that, this only happened during a finite period, these sightings that had been reported. And that was about all he said. So what I was curious about and what I analyzed was that comment. What did he mean by a finite period of time? Brian Bender, I asked him, and he said he thinks that what this guy meant is that they're not happening constantly everywhere all the time, that they're just happening in these short periods of time. No doubt that's probably accurate. Of course, we've heard from unidentified over a couple cases, 2004 outside of San Diego and then 2014 and 15 outside of Florida. But so he's saying, even if there are other cases, they're kind of one-off type situations, and not like they're just contending with these things all of the time. And from the witnesses we've heard from, you've had several on, or you've had at least Kevin Day on, so have I. This wasn't something that happened regular. So that's why it was so important when it did happen to them, and they did get, confront these unknown objects. But Tyler Rogoway has been writing about this, and I asked him about it also. He's a defense writer. You've had him on the show for The Drive. And he says that he agrees that it's accurate. There are finite periods of time. And he's been honing in that in both of these incidents in 2014 and 2004, that there was new radar technology that was deployed in both of those instances when they started seeing things. And that could be a factor that leads to the possibility of human origins for these things. The problem with that, as he admits, is the technology and the characteristics that were displayed by these objects is beyond what we have right now. It's definitely a technology that it defeats the physics as we know it currently. And he admits that makes that harder to understand what these are. But, in his defense, to people who would probably criticize him to say, if it's beyond what we can do, how can it be human? We don't know yet. And this is how you investigate. And it's great. I love what Tyler is doing personally. And what the Navy said on honing in on this being a finite, period of time may give us some insight into the Navy's thinking. At least the Admiral may have been briefed on investigations where that is a factor. They're looking at similar factors that Tyler Rogoway is looking at to try to determine if there is indeed, a foreign government that has had some sort of technological breakthrough. And of course, if that's true, that would be a big deal. That was something that, somebody, one of the lawmakers recently, Mike Walker, he wrote a letter to the Navy wanting to know more, and he highlighted that same issue. So a lot still going on in Washington and with the, military around UFOs publicly. So it's still a hot topic out there. Another hot topic.
Wait, just a second, if we could, before we move on from that. I just, I'm wondering, we have, you and I have talked about this before. We have seen these characteristics, or people have noted these characteristics of these vehicles, long, long ago, way, way back. And I'm thinking it's more to do with what you mentioned earlier, our new technology. Perhaps they're always there. Perhaps they've always been there, off and on, finite, like the Admiral said. But perhaps we can only just begin to see them, And anyway, I think a lot of it has to do with our technology.
I think that is another great possibility. In fact, I talked to a guy I knew, an older gentleman in Colorado, and right now his name eludes me, Franklin Carter. Great guy. He actually took over a UFO conference in Cheyenne, Wyoming, but he was in the Navy way back during the DEW Line, during the Cold War, where they were part of the ships that would watch for anything coming. They would, go right up to the water there, up against to where they can, closest to Russia as possible, to monitor what Russia is up to. When they instituted a new radar system that he was in charge of, he was the radar tech, this happened. They started seeing things way up in the sky. They were reporting them, And eventually, every time they saw something like this that would go thousands of miles per hour or something, they would call up Franklin and say, "Hey, Carter, we got another problem with the radar. Come check this out." And he would verify that there wasn't, a problem with the radar. In fact, when they would get these, they started calling them Carter's contacts. They'd be like, "Carter, we got another one." And he would come check it out.
Wow.
Well, they had technicians and everything come. Finally, he asked some of the other radar techs on some of the other ships, "Hey, you guys have this new radar. Aren't you guys seeing this stuff too?" And they said, "Yeah, but we're not going to report it. It's too much of a headache. People make fun of you. There's all this paperwork and bureaucracy." And so they wouldn't report it at all, which is something that, we hear quite often from people in the military. So there's two reasons that's important. One, it speaks to your theory or your idea that perhaps we're just seeing more and that they're staying out of our radar. And once we increase our radar capabilities, then we can spot them, and then maybe they move away further or something like that. That's, I think, a valid point. The second thing, though, is why it's so important that the Navy said they have UFO reporting guidelines and take it seriously. Those, people in there laughed. Tyler Rogaway even said that was disgusting that some of his colleagues would laugh at this question. But that's kind of the reaction that people have. And I think that's the importance of the Navy saying this is important and we want to hear from UFO reports to say that they're taking it seriously. It's not a laughing matter. It is something serious. I think that's the main function of the rollout of these reports, because no doubt we already know they already have reporting systems and processes for important things like this. So I don't know that that's becoming more robust, but it's more of a message that, hey, we are taking this more seriously. Do send those reports along. But I think you have a good thought there. Yeah. I was talking about hot, and I was talking about hot in the desert, not just here in Phoenix, but in the deserts near Area 51, where millions of people are threatening to gather in a few weeks here on September 20th. Well, just yesterday, Lincoln County said that they are going ahead with plans to declare an emergency due to this and Storm Area 51 thing. Now, they also, interestingly enough, I guess, released some permits to some of the events because people are taking advantage and they're holding concerts and campouts and parties out there. So there's a lot of that sort of thing going on, and that's what these guys are preparing for. A lot of times when emergency declarations are made, it frees up emergency funds, and they probably need these funds, hopefully to keep people safe. This is a desert. There's no gas anywhere around there. There's no water. There's only a couple small little places that don't have a lot of facilities. So I'm imagining that they're going to try to make sure and provide facilities, also have security and emergency personnel, a lot of first responders ready for whatever may happen. Now, hopefully it's just an innocent party, maybe even some talks about UFOs. I'm actually in talks with someone who asked me, "Hey, do I want to come out there and, talk about UFOs during this whole thing?" And I may, but of course I don't want anybody to pass the gates. And that's kind of the theme of all these parties. Don't pass the gates, but let's party. Some of them are thinking, and make money. Whereas others are activists and they're thinking, well, let's highlight. Let's say, hey, we think this is important. We want to know more about this topic, and make that kind of the whole thing, as opposed to trying to do anything illegal.
I would imagine, I know we're out of time here for the news, but I would imagine that they're going to be very prepared for something to happen. Yeah. I'm not saying Rachel, but I'm going to say Area 51. I believe that they'll probably be ready for something.
Yeah, this is Lincoln County in particular that asked for the emergency declaration. So I think, it's going to be more at a county level, and no doubt there is some sort of base involvement as well.
Right. Alejandro, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great show.
All right. I sure will. You bet.
Good.
Talk to you next week.
See ya.
All right, everyone. The guests we have tonight, they are part of J3 Films that was formed back in 2001. And they have extensive ties to the ufology and paranormal fields. We're going to talk to them about their previous film, the Stan Romanek story as well. And anyway, their new film, The Seeding, is getting a lot of exposure, and as Alejandro mentioned, is winning a number of awards. So we're going to be talking about the whole thing. All right. So welcome to the show, Jack and John.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes. This is great that you two could both be on. I do appreciate that. And I know you must be very, very busy right now because it's just coming right up. You're, what is it? Is it 2 weeks? Your show premieres, right?
2 weeks from today.
And where does it premiere?
It's going to be available on every digital download pay-per-view platform. So the iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Video, and Xbox platforms, and PlayStation, Vudu, Vimeo. So
wow.
If you're watching video or listening to music on a platform, chances are pretty good it'll be on there.
All right. And that was the voice of John Semple and Jack. You two got together, and did one of you have more of an interest in UFOs and that topic than the other? How did this all happen?
Well, initially, yes. I had already kind of been down the rabbit hole, and this is going back. Oh boy, we can go way back. But let's start maybe 10 years ago. We were talking about doing a documentary, and I was already fairly familiar with the ufology landscape, and I had a couple ideas. We need to do something really compelling, really, really cool. We need to find a cool story. And John was coming at it. So we're filmmakers, but I had that interest in the topic, and it worked out well because when we decided on the story we were going to tell, which was our first documentary, the one we did, Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story. We knew we found the great story, but it's great because John came at it more from, okay, I'm gonna step back and learn as I go along with all of this stuff that we're finding out and we're discovering, and keep that filmmaker kind of distance and objectivity. And I was able to do that too, but I was also able to offer a lot of information as far as, look, this is what's going on, and as far as ufology is concerned, this is what's been happening for the last 70 years. So it was a really kind of good combo for us because we're able to maintain that filmmaking kind of stance and be objective in the way we're telling the stories. But there's also there's an understanding of the topic that we're delving into.
Now, Stan was the fourth guest on my show here. Boy, we're going back just about 8 years, close to 8 years ago. And I know there's a lot of controversy in all different types of ways with Stan. Of course, you know what he was found guilty of. And the timing worked just about the same time that I saw your film go up on Netflix. Was the timing about the same time?
Yeah, it was a very interesting journey, to say the least. We premiered the film at the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival in November of 2013. In January of 2014 is when Stan had his legal issues, as well as just I think January was the interview with Peter Slattery. That had the flipping pen cap. Mm-hmm. And then a month later was the announcement that he had been arrested. So those things couldn't have come at a worse time for us because we were in the process of talking with distribution opportunities for the film. And once all that happened, it was those conversations ended. The only way that they would be interested is if we recut the film and focused on his current situation. And we're like, well, no, this film is about a time in his life from 2000 to 2010. That's what we focus on. That's the timeline in the film. So we kind of said we're going to stick to our guns. We're going to release it as it is, but we did the independent route, and we created a website, altpov.tv, and self-distributed the film there. Fast forward 3 years, 2017, January of 2017, we get a phone call from The Orchard out of the blue saying we're interested in repping your film. So it was released initially same way on digital platforms, and then they sent a screener copy to Netflix executives, and they didn't even have to pitch it. They looked at it and they were like, yep, we love the evidence in the beginning, done deal. We'll have it on Netflix in a few months. So that timing was I think sometimes I say it was a coincidence, and other times I'll say, well, there's no coincidences. But we weren't reaching out to anybody. We made no effort to try to connect to a distribution opportunity. Our only thing was that we knew that there were people who invested, and those people who had invested in the film needed to make their money back.
Right.
It was more of a loan than an investment, not a investor situation. But we had notes that we owed people money for, and once that opportunity presented itself, we were like, yeah, sure, we'll distribute the film. Just the timing of it happened to be when the Netflix drop was right at the time of I would say the crescendo of his court dates. So that drew a lot of attention to his case and the film, and detrimentally so to the film, because a lot of people went into attack mode based on the event on YouTube, and also the legal issues, which we completely understand, and don't blame anybody for reacting the way that they did.
Well, I understand. Yeah, I do get all that. And one thing I would have to say about Stan, he there's no reason for him to have embellished the way he did. You talked about Slattery when he was on that show, because everyone that I've talked to that has known Stan, had known him in the beginning, said things do actually happen around him, and these are people that I hesitate to say their names on air, but these are people that are serious in the UFO topic, that have experienced weird things. It is unfortunate. His legal situation is very unfortunate, and I think, I would have to say you were extremely lucky, in my opinion, to have that break and be able to hopefully recoup your money back on that. We are right at the break, so we are going to head into break. So hang in there. We'll be right back right after these messages. Race? Well, I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe Race stepped away. Maybe we're still live on KGRA. I guess we'll just continue to go. And so we're just going to continue on here. And sorry about that. A little clunky. We do have a break coming up at 55 minutes after this hour. We'll get into that when that happens. So overall, what made you decide to move on and create this other film?
Well, I would say the one thing that we learned from making the first one was that there are a lot of stories out there. There are a lot of people who've had experiences that they felt like seeing the film and the fact that it was getting the kind of attention that it was helped them realize that their experiences were similar and that they weren't crazy. And we received over 700 messages on our Facebook page alone, and dozens more through email, with people saying, thank you so much for getting this film out there. I know I'm not crazy. I've had similar things happen to me. So that was really an interesting point for us, because initially we weren't all in on making another ufology film. And that realizing that there was a humanity element to this, where people were being affected by their experiences and mostly shunned by general society for those experiences, we felt that we had a chance to do more work, tell more stories, and add a more humanistic storytelling approach to it that brought these stories to the masses, as opposed to targeting a group of people, a demographic that already believes. So our approach in the second film was to introduce fresh faces with the people who have had experiences. The three principal people had not had their stories very well known when we first started, although one of them has turned into a little bit of a rock star over the last year, and Geraldine Orozco. Her story is out. She's leading a lot of people through discussions and trying to help them with their experiences, and we can get into that a little bit more. But when we started making the film, we realized throughout the course of production that we had a different story to tell, and I had an epiphany during it that this was not about phenomena. This was about the people. So we needed to move forward with a story that connected people to people, as opposed to just focus on the events, the lights in the sky, the evidence. We wanted to tell a more human story.
That's interesting. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, I have been kind of on the fence about abductions, but then I've also kind of corrected my personal thoughts about that in such a way to look at it this way. I do believe in certain cases, and if I believe in those certain cases, like for instance, the Betty and Barney Hill case, Travis Walton, who I've talked to a number of times face to face, and then there's several, the Allagash incident, there's several of them that are just too compelling for me to say, no, that couldn't happen. The Pascagoula case is another one. So I do believe that if whoever it is, and I'm not saying aliens, I never like to say aliens, but whatever it is visiting us here from wherever they're visiting us from, they're going to be not just landing and going away, they're going to be looking at the biology here. And, there's so many things that could be related to this. Cattle mutilations is interesting, and, there's just a lot of things that are possibilities of whoever these visitors are, could be possibly doing. Where I get a little, I kind of get blurry-eyed is when it gets into the reptilians, and I know that was part of your film and the thoughts, and then the seeding, the actual, the main part of your show, the hybrid children. But I want to talk. That's hard to swallow. And I think it's hard to swallow for anyone who's not involved in this. And so I want to start out by saying, how did you vet the people in your movie?
Well, we spoke to dozens of people, and we had long conversations with them, and they told us their stories, and a lot of them wanted to share their stories, but there were some who were afraid to. They were tentative about it because they were, depending on what their situation was, whether a relationship situation, when married, they have kids, they're involved in the community, could have been a professional reason, it's because this is a social taboo. They told us their story, but they didn't want to go on film. One of the things you mentioned, though, Martin, that's really important to understand is that's one of the reasons why it is very difficult to swallow the idea of hybrid children and this kind of hybridization programs being done by ETs as part of the abduction process, of the abduction phenomena. But what we've tried to do is lead people down a path and start at the very beginning and start with, okay, look, here's this one man, Stan Romanek, who's seeing strange lights in the sky. And then all of a sudden he's seeing daylight craft, and there's groups of people that are seeing it with him. So I think once people understand that, okay, I can wrap my head around, and I went through the same process you did, I can now wrap my head around. I always believed that there was life on other planets, that there were extraterrestrial life forms. And then I pretty much objectively kind of I was pretty sure that they somehow could get here, that they have visited, and, depending on their technology. But then now it gets a little trickier because now it starts to hit home. It starts to get real, almost a little unnerving, because now when we're talking about abductions, we're talking about something very personal. It's an invasion of privacy. It's an invasion of our space and what's going on. But I think that when we're trying to lead people from A to B, C, D, and not go directly to M or Z, which would be, where we're going with this is, are there hybridization programs that are ongoing and have been ongoing for decades, wherein people, men and women, have been abducted, have been experimented on, have been used for reproductive purposes, and the end result of that is hybrid children. And it's kind of like, well, why? Why might that be the case? So when you say I can't wrap my head around that, that's really something that's totally understandable, because most people who are still wrapping their heads around, are UFOs even real? Are ETs even out there? Well, then it's going to be harder to understand or accept that these hybridization programs are occurring.
Right. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, John?
No, it's a journey, I think, an awakening, a discovery of possibilities. And we've said this numerous times before, is we're not going out there saying that what we're documenting is fact. We're telling stories. And what we're doing is finding stories that corroborate a pathway that has been shared by many people who've had the same stories before. There's documented evidence of people who have shared their abduction story that live in remote areas that don't have access to the internet, television, even electricity. But when they share their stories, they corroborate with people who have shared their stories. So when you start to see, evidence, let's say evidence, and we had a discussion with Dr. David Jacobs about this, and he said, I'm sick and tired of people saying that there is no evidence. We've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have had stories, shared experiences, have had abduction process stories that they've shared that are very similar. They're corroborating each other. At some point, we have to acknowledge the fact that this very well may be the evidence that we should be looking at. So we're just trying to present the information in a way that allows people to analyze it in a digestible way, like Jack was saying, is that we're not going to take them into the deep dive at step one. So the 3 films that we're making are trying to get people to watch them in sequence and say, okay, now I have a better understanding of the big picture, as opposed to them just diving into the minutia, which is what a lot of films do. So our objective from the very beginning was to reach the widest audience possible. And in order to do that, we need to share stories that were not super over the top, but would also connect with people. And one of the ways this film connects with people is from an emotional standpoint. So it is not I would say, I've talked with people from a scientific point of view that there's no empirical evidence to prove this, and they're exactly right. There isn't. But there's a lot of stories of people sharing something that happened to them where they had a profound impact emotionally, psychologically, in some cases intellectually. So we can't deny that people who have had these experiences, whatever they may be, that they had them. And that's one of the issues I think that we have, is that so many people are denying that these things exist and that these experiences are real, when the individuals that have been through them have done nothing more than tell their side of the story. And they're not looking for fame or fortune. And anybody who knows the ufology world will know that that's not doable. Mm-hmm. For anybody who goes out and shares their story, what they're doing basically is opening themselves up to a tremendous amount of ridicule. Mm-hmm. So our objective really was to let's guide people through a process, so that at the end of each film that we've made, ask yourself one simple question: what if this is true? The what if part. So if it is true, what does that mean? So we're trying to encourage a discussion that asks the age-old question of why are we here? Where do we come from? Where do we go when we die? All of these things, I think, are ultimately on the table when you start talking about something as big as this. This is not just about, is that light in the sky a spaceship? There's so much more implications to something like this, and we just want to explore it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've mentioned this on this show before, when it comes to abductions or experiencers. If I was experiencing what they are supposedly experiencing, I don't know if I could function in this world. I just don't know how I could possibly move on. Like that, if something like that was happening at night, how would I ever even want to go to work the next day or function with family or anything like that? How do these people do it if this is really happening? I mean, what some thoughts on that? Jack?
Well, I think, yeah, sure. It depends on the individual, but, a lot of them don't function very well. And, they really, in most cases, they're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. Just like as someone who would come back from the Gulf War or Afghanistan, it's the same. It's a traumatic, stressful experiences that they're having, and they are feeling that psychologically. Many of them, though, what tends to happen with people is the more time that goes by, they start to accept it. And they put it in a particular box, and some people might say, "Well, I was destined to do this, to be part of this, and maybe I agreed to do this in a prior lifetime, or that somehow it's my purpose, and I'm helping humanity. Somehow, I'm helping humanity." But many people, they suffer, and they don't, and especially at first, they're a mess. They don't go to work. Relationships are destroyed. They lose their jobs. We had one particular person in this film, Rob Fullington, who really struggled mightily, and he was dealing with physical issues as a result of this, psychological issues as a result of this, and he basically was almost indigent, pretty much. I mean, he had lost everything. And then they start to get back on their feet slowly but surely. But, this was posed the other night, and John and I were talking about this. How many people that have had these experiences, and we'll never know this, but how many may have committed suicide?
That was actually on my mind, but I was almost afraid to ask.
It's a tough subject, but I guarantee you that there are a certain number of these experiencers who just can't live with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I would emphasize too, is that when you're making a film like this, at the end of the day, you're showing an hour and 45 minutes. So we're not showing everything that we captured. Would be impossible to do that. Although we are going to be featuring some of the interviews and a great portion of the interviews on a Patreon account, which we're building out, and that should be some of these things will be available for anybody who wants to do a deeper dive. Will be able to see them by becoming a supporting member of our Patreon page, because we want to continue to tell these stories. And one of the ways that we can do that is to find a community that supports the storytelling and the path that we're taking, which is more of a humanistic approach as opposed to just evidence or conspiracy theory. But the point that I want to make is that when you sit down with somebody for 7-8 hours to do an interview, and they break down in tears and have to walk away from the camera, several times because it's too intense to tell their story, I just don't. There's a level of compassion that you have to have towards people who are doing this. They're feeling in the moment that I'm sharing something that is potentially could go out to the world to see. And I consider what Geraldine, Rob, and April in particular did was brave, because they're sharing a story that in a week from today, when it goes out for the masses to see, their stories are no longer their own stories. They're going to become part of the ufology story in a grand way. So what we just want to do is encourage people to step back before you're quick to judge and say, what if I spent a week with this person, or a day, or even an afternoon with them? What would I experience? And you would likely experience manic activity and depressed activity. You would see the highs and the lows in a very short amount of time, because every single person that we've interviewed who's had an experience shares the highs and the lows, and they're usually very excited one moment and very down the next, and it's difficult to watch sometimes. And that's one of the things we want to drive home is that, as corny as this might sound, experiences are people too. We should treat them with the same respect and compassion and empathy that we would with anybody else who's been going through something traumatic, because it is a traumatic experience for them.
Right. And I understand there's I've actually seen this in action out in Phoenix the last number of years. There's sort of a group therapy going on between them. They get together and basically help each other just by talking about it. Did you see any of that? Have you
saw when we were shooting the film? We shot some things that weren't included in the film, and one of them was bringing these people together so that they could talk about their personal experiences amongst people who've had the experiences. And Barbara Lamb and Yvonne Smith were there as well to kind of facilitate it, and they talked for about 3 hours. And there was this sense of understanding, a sense of community, but also a sense of support that I found my tribe. Because, there's people who've been telling their stories for 30, 40 years, and those people have become comfortable with that exposure. Other people have never told their story to anyone, and then they're asked to share their story in a group setting, and it's very difficult, very challenging. But one of the things we want to encourage with this film is that, two things: for people to understand that those going through the experiences are having they're having trauma, and they need our empathy and compassion, but also to encourage the people who've had them to find the community. So we'll have, at the end of the film, there's a link to, shown that is a link to a portal on our website that will allow people who have had an experience, if they're comfortable enough to do more research, they can start there. Because that's one of the things we've had since we started promoting this film, is several people have reached out to us and say, I have a story to tell, but I don't want to tell anybody, but I need to speak to someone. Can you help us? So it's happened on numerous times. One time with a couple where the male had an experience and is just does not want to talk about it, but it's impacting the relationship. And the female was like, we need to do something to help this. I believe him, but he's struggling with sharing his story. So just extrapolate that out to relationships where people who've had that experience. What does that mean? What is that energy like where you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody? So we're trying to encouraging that sense of community. And I think that once people find their tribe and realize that they're not alone, they find ways to better manage it. Like Jack had mentioned earlier, they find the box that best works for them on how to manage it. But it never goes away. I mean, there's a line in the film that Yvonne Smith says, is that whenever she screens somebody for regression, she says to them is that, once we open the store, we can't close it. Once the toothpaste is out of the toothpaste, it can't go back in. So you have to be prepared for what's to come. And the people who are brave enough to share those stories and have those regression experiences have a story to tell that we think is worthy of listening to.
Just a quick story about Yvonne. I was out in California, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I was near where she was at. I contacted her and said, hey, can I come into your office and we'll record a show? And she said, sure, fine. So I went in, the recording equipment, everything was working fine. I went and recorded there, did a show there. This was back when I was doing just the podcast. And I got home and I plugged it in, and it was really weird. It was not her and I. It was like someone like humming, and almost sounded like a Native American chant. So I called her and I said, you're not going to believe this, but the recording, I even checked the recording when I was in her office, was working fine. I said, there's something really going on. She said, it's not the first time. She had other things happen in her office like that, which was totally bizarre. I know I'm going off the deep end here, but I wanted to talk to you. We're going to be going to break in about 5 minutes or so, but I have a friend in Sweden who's been on the show a number of times, Claes Svahn, and he is basically in charge of, or he was a past president of their UFO group over there. It's kind of like a MUFON. takes in a lot of UFO cases, very interesting. And there's no ridicule, and there's no ridicule in Sweden as far as he's concerned. People take the subject really seriously. He has a huge library he's in charge of. So I asked him about abductions. I said, what's going on there and about abductions? He said, I might get one case a year. Now, my question is, do you think that it's a regional situation? You mentioned earlier that people are abducted all over the world, but do you think there's possibly a regional type situation? Because look at America, you know, I mean, so many people here are saying something's going on.
That's hard to say. I mean, you know, you have population differences. You know, we have a much larger population than Sweden. But it could, you know, you could talk about, well, where, you know, again, now we're getting into, we could talk about underground bases and where, you know, where these things are occurring. And, you know, it's hard to, and maybe there is a military component to it. And if that's the case, then the U.S. has a much larger military presence than Sweden does. So, but there's so many variables to that. That's actually really surprising that he said only one a year. Wow.
Yeah, but the one,
I think part of it too is that there is this. Is there a comfort level in sharing those stories?
Well,
so
I asked him about that, and he said that they're very comfortable talking about that type of situation. Okay. But I will tell you that the one abduction story he told me was a doozy, and it was a police officer involved in everything. His wife lifted right off the bed. He saw the whole thing and couldn't move, and it was really a crazy story. So he's not opposed to it, and as far as he knows, no one else is opposed to it there. So I just thought that was interesting. And
I think I think in situations like that too, it's encouraging conversation and talking about it and sharing it in a way where people feel like it is I think there's a pride thing. There is a integrity, and some people will choose not to tell their story because they know that nothing good is going to come of it. At least that would be what a majority of the people, would say. Jack mentioned earlier about Rob. Rob's had experiences that he's still grappling with. He's still struggling with how he fits into everything that he's learned and everything that he's been exposed to. And he told us, he goes, I sometimes feel I think I would feel more comfortable off planet than on. He said, but I didn't feel that way 7-8 years ago or 10 years ago when he had his first experience in 2009. So he said that everything has changed for him. And then you have somebody like Geraldine, who was a successful businesswoman. She was engaged to get married. She had an abduction scenario that she recalled in 2013, and it kept gnawing at her. But her fiance at the time said, this is something that you don't want to make present to your family, the community at large. Your kids will have to deal with you telling this story. So she buried it. But she said it kept gnawing at her. She had some other things that happened too, and she went and had 2 regressions. And after the one regression, she broke off the relationship, and after the other regression, within a month of each other, she quit her 6-figure-a-year job and said, I need to help people who've gone through what I've gone through. And she's dedicated her life to making a difference. So there's somebody who's had an experience and has turned it into something positive by trying to help in the best way she knows how. Wow,
that is really interesting. I bet the number one question that an experiencer has is why. Why is this happening? Maybe why is it happening to me, or just plain why? What did you? We only got about a minute to break. I don't know if either one of you want to tackle that.
Yeah, they do ask that, and a lot of times they don't get the answer. But they always like, why me? Of everyone on this planet, like, why am I going through this? And it's almost like you're going through all those phases of grief. You have the anger, you have the fear and the anger. And all these emotions are there for these people. To answer that question as to the possibilities of why would take longer than the time we have right now. But that is something we could talk about after the break. Sure. But yeah.
And if there are so many people being having this experience, it just seems like you talked earlier. There's there's no real empirical evidence that this is happening, and I wonder, is is there never going to be? I mean, is there not going to be someone nearby with a cell phone camera that's going to snap a picture of someone floating out a window, or, I mean,
it's not blurry.
What's that?
It's not blurry.
Yeah, that's not blurry. Yeah. So anyway, we're right at our break. So we're going to head into that break, and hang in, everyone. We'll be right back right after these messages. All right. Welcome back to the show. My guests this evening, we have both John Sumple and we have Jack Roth on the show. We're talking about Extraordinary, the Seeding, their film coming up real soon, and you need to go check it out. It's going to be in theaters. And so let's see. We were talking about more or less evidence when we went into the break, and I'd like to address that a little bit more, if you would. I don't know which one of you wants to take that, but how do you see that we actually have evidence for what is happening?
Well, I think there is evidence, and I think that we saw that in the case of Stan Romanek. He had an enormous amount of what would be called trace evidence, and that could be anything from marks on the ground, crop circles, landing impressions from something, to marks on your body, to strange objects in your body, which have, when we know this to be true, with Dr. Lear, when he would do surgery on people and take these objects out of people who were abducted, and then there was something in their bodies, whether it was a monitoring device or whatnot, whatever it was, and it was a foreign object, and in many cases they couldn't determine really what it was. It was mechanical, but it was also biological. So the body wouldn't reject it. So the technology was there. It was pretty high end with these things. So you have that kind of evidence. You have cattle mutilations all over. I mean, there's so much evidence that suggests that something's happening to these animals, and it's not being done with the laser precision that the certain parts of their anatomy are being taken. It's just not possible for it to be a hoax or a bunch of drunk teenagers doing this. So there is evidence, but again, it's just evidence. It's not proof. And I think but if you look at all of it and really look at the body of evidence, then it's compelling. And I don't say it doesn't prove anything, but I think if you look at it objectively, and you take a logical progression of the things that you're seeing, kind of makes sense. It's kind of like, well, why are they taking these particular body parts from cows? Or why are they taking uterus from a cow? And why are the bovine, the whole idea that bovine DNA is the closest, that bovine hemoglobin is the closest thing to our hemoglobin, which people don't realize that. They think it's ape or monkeys. But it's not. It's cows. So what does that suggest? Is that all part of this experimentation, this hybridization kind of these projects that might be happening? So I do think there is evidence. Now, is it enough to say, well, it's proof? No, absolutely not. And we don't know what it is. But there is. We went through a ton of evidence in Stan's case, and it took us quite a while to go through all of it. So it depends on how you look at it.
Right. What are your thoughts on evidence, John?
Yeah, I agree in principle with what Jack had said, and I think that it's more a matter of what you're willing to explore. So you might sit there and say, "Well, this is a tough pill for me to swallow." Then my question would be, have you spent time with anybody who's had experiences? And if you have, how much time and how many people? And when you start to hear a lot of the corroboration in storytelling and a lot of the imagery, and you see the emotional responses as you're having these conversations, and I'm not saying with one or two people, but if you have a chance to sit down with dozens of different people at different times and have them tell their story, you're going to start to hear a lot of similar things. And you're going to hear in a lot of the people, in a lot of cases, the sense of a humbleness, or you might think I'm crazy, but this may sound ridiculous, but they're aware that what they're sharing with you sounds extremely far-fetched. And some of the people that we've talked to say that they believe that it's far-fetched, but they can't deny their experience. On the evidence side too, there are people who've come back with, holding objects. There have been people who have had clothes changed. So, when you hear those things, one of the initial reactions to non-believers is, well, this is staged, this is hoaxed. They're looking for attention. And, our experience is the people whose stories are the most real aren't looking for attention. The people who are looking for attention are usually the people that we walk away from because we're not out to advance anyone's personal agenda. Yeah. So we've gone out of our way to make sure that we're not. We actually had a couple of people when we were screening them to share their stories. Their first question was, how much are you going to pay me? And we said, sorry, we're not interested in you, because that's not what this is about. Yeah. So if that comes out of anybody's mouth, they're looking for the financial gain. That's really not something that we're interested in. I'll tell an interesting story that gives you an idea of why people do the investigative work that they do. Some of the people in our projects, we do pay them an honorarium. I would say some of them, all of them we do. It's just, a fraction of amount. We don't have huge budgets. It's not a big deal. But when we interviewed Dr. David Jacobs for our last film, I had shared something, or our next film, I had shared with him during a phone call back in the winter, January-ish timeframe, that we would be giving him an honorarium. And he was like gracious and thank you. But when we were done with the interview, I handed him a check, and he broke down in tears. He says, no one's ever done this to me before. He says, no one's ever given me money before. He says, I might get somebody might, throw me, $50, and he says, and it's nice, but no one's ever made me feel like my work is as important as you guys just did. Wow. Because it is important. If someone who's dedicated, and another thing he shared is that he's never taken a penny for any of the regressions that he's done. He says, because this is research and I don't pay for research. So, that's another reason why when I look at people who have that level of integrity in how they approach this, they're doing it for the right reasons. We're doing it for the right reasons, is we just want to tell stories. Is there money involved in this? Absolutely. And there needs to be, because we wouldn't be able to do what we do if there wasn't a financial incentive to do it, which is, hey, can we borrow money from these 10 individuals to make a film? And the answer is usually yes, if you can pay me back. So our incentive is to find the people who are interested in the stories, who want to help us tell them, and then make sure that we are able to generate revenue that can pay that money back. Because as anybody who's ever done a film project before knows, it's not cheap. It's an expensive endeavor, and it's a very time-consuming endeavor. And all of us have day jobs. This is a nights and weekends venture for us. So when we get into the midst of pre-production, there's a lot of time spent. Jack and I spend probably 60, 70 hours in phone calls in the month before we, determine what the structure of the film is going to be and who's going to be in it. And there's the production for a couple of weeks, and then post-productions for a couple of months. Very time-consuming process, and we're doing it because we think these stories are worth telling. So the evidence question is, I think there is evidence out there that supports these stories. I think that people who are skeptical or non-believers, I would encourage them to spend time with individuals who've had these experiences, or do a deeper dive on research that challenges your current belief system. You'll find things that will amaze you and definitely cause you to scratch your head and go, I can't believe that this is a possibility.
Speaking of budget and a long time to do a film, I just want to say to the listening audience that Randall Nickerson, his film, The Ariel Phenomenon, about the Ariel school incident, will be, it's all wrapped, it's done. He's in post-production. He's actually looking right now to get the film out there. So that should be, we're hoping, by the end of the year. I just want to make that quick little announcement because he worked, I do believe it was 8 years straight on that film. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me about just his editing costs were just out of control. You mentioned Roger Leir, and when you mentioned him, someone put in the chat room real quickly, whatever happened to Roger Leir's implants? Did you ever, I have no idea. Have you ever looked at or thought about that? You know, all the implants that he extracted?
Yeah, I don't know if he kept them or he gave them back to the people he took them out of. That's actually a really great question.
Yeah, I mean, because if there's really something to that, that would be really good to know. I do believe at one time someone told me that they were in a safe somewhere, but I really have lost touch. John, you were talking about the credibility of someone's agenda and their credibility. How are the ways that you were making sure, just absolutely certain, that you had someone that was totally credible?
Yeah, and like talking about the folks who've asked for money is the first question. Mm-hmm. That to me means that they're looking to make a living. They're looking for a payday as a result of telling their story. And while I do understand that people, there are people who have had situations, that as a result of their experiences that they can no longer work or function. Stan Romanek is a perfect example. Some people will ridicule him and say that, he's been living off the glad handing of other people and that he hasn't, but he hadn't held a job and he couldn't hold a job. And he was diagnosed with PTSD. So he wasn't able to work, and Lisa became his primary caregiver, at that time in their lives. So this was back in 2010, 2011 timeframe. So, you look at the whole story. You look at like somebody like Stan Romanek, where you spend the time with the individual to really understand the depth and breadth of their experience, the evidence that they've secured, the unusual things that have happened to them, the corroboration of some of the experiences with other people who were present. It's very difficult to sit down with an individual and say, tell us your story, and they have no frame of they have no ability to bring somebody else. There's nobody else that I've shared this with. I've never talked to. So when you hear that, it's like, well, it's kind of hard to really corroborate your story if there's nobody else that was a part of that. So almost everybody that we've talked to, there were other people either in the room or the stories were shared immediately after they happened. But another thing that I would say the most compelling thing is that we spend a lot of time with the different people, both on the phone and in person. And when somebody tells their story again and again and again, and it never changes, usually it's an indication that they're telling the truth. If you hear different things that change every time you hear the story, there's a little embellishment here or a forgotten thing there. It's a little trigger in the back of my mind. And I've even called people on that, before. So I'm like, yeah, when you told us that story, you mentioned this, 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 and this. And we've never had any gotcha moments because I think we've done a very good job of vetting people. But I think, for what we're doing, credibility is important. We have done, a little background checks on some of the people that we've worked with, and we've had, a vetting process that we've gone through. But we're not. Our approach with the documentary filmmaking is not to validate, vindicate, or prove anything. What we want to do is share a compendium of stories that are being told over and over again by hundreds of thousands of people, to the point where we start to pay attention to them a little bit more, so that we're not just relegating those stories to the fringes. They're part of our daily conversation, our daily existence. So we're really hopeful that when this film comes out, that it will stimulate a dialogue, and we're prepared for that dialogue to be both positive and negative. And you know what? That's fine.
Right. Now, when I guess the part that the person that I'd really want to hear from is the one that doesn't want to talk. That person to me. As soon as someone says, "Well, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to talk about it," and unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. You know, I mean, what do you think is compelling these people to actually, you know, come forward and talk publicly like they are? Either one of you can take that, of course.
Well, I think they get to a point where they realize it's one of a couple of things. They can realize that it's important for other people to know, and they're going to be open about it because they can help other people who have been through what they're going through. And a lot of this happens when people congregate towards their own, so they can go to a conference or they'll go to a meeting, and they'll meet other people who've had these experiences, and they realize how important it is to share their experiences. Nothing good comes from keeping things inside. And I think that even with, when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder in general, we see that. We see that it's good to share your feelings, to share your emotions, to have people around who understand and you can talk to about it, whether it's a trauma that you suffered in a war or a personal trauma in life or something like an abduction experience. It's all the same to the human to the psychology. So I think that is one of the reasons where they find, and there's another reason too, which I find interesting, is they finally get fed up. We've seen this, and we see this a lot of times with older people, where they're just like, you know what, I've been dealing with this for so long, and I'm tired of it, and I don't care anymore, and I want to tell people. It takes a lot out of a human being to keep something inside, to keep a secret. Mm-hmm. And that could be we've seen that with the military people we've interviewed who had to keep quiet about the things they saw. And finally, they're in their 70s and 80s now. They're like, you know what? Screw that. Uh-huh. I'm telling my story. They can kill me now. I don't care. I'm 85. What are they going to do to me?
Yeah.
We've heard that several times from people face to face, talking to people. So I think those are the things I can a couple of the reasons why people finally come forward and say, you know what, I need to tell my story.
I agree. I've seen that a number of times in the UFO field where someone will say, the heck with it, this, what are they going to do type of thing. And that's why I think the deathbed confessions in Roswell, to me, that's some of the most compelling, I guess you would call it evidence, of the witnesses and their deathbed confessions. I mean, they have nothing to lose at that point, and why bring it up? It's always, that's always really compelling to me. I think what I'm going to do at this point is open the lines. We have a new phone number. We also have a call screener. Race is helping us out, and that phone number is 855-472-5483. I'm going to put that up on the screen for the people over in YouTube as well. So, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on, and one of them is regression. We both talked about Yvonne Smith, but what are your thoughts on regression in general? Either one of you can take that.
Yeah, I think it's something that is worthy of exploration. There is a metaphysical consciousness element to this that, and this, again, whole nother show. If you want to get into the whole idea of consciousness and multi-dimensions and things of that nature, that, just because we don't comprehend it or understand it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. This is a discussion that we have over and over again, is that 50 years from now, people will be laughing at us for what we didn't believe. Mm-hmm. So there's a theme in the film that is the Circles essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson, that whenever you expand knowledge, whenever the circle gets a little bit wider based on discovery or learning something new, it opens up many more questions. So you've never really solved anything. You're just continuing to expand the evolution of thought. And that's really, if you want to say that's what we're we're doing, that's what we're doing. We're trying to expand the evolution of thought from something that is an earthbound construct or a societal construct or a religious construct and say, think outside of that construct in a different way. Give yourself the opportunity to look at it a little bit differently. And I think that that you may see something that you weren't looking for, but has a profound impact on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also add real quick, if I can, about as far as regression goes, what we've learned is, when something extremely traumatic happens to someone, the defense mechanism of the body is to forget about it, is to not remember it, is to bury it very deep in the subconscious. So when basically regression is pulling that out. So it makes sense that people would sometimes not consciously remember some of these horrible things that happen to them, and then when they're relaxed and they go into these states of with consciousness, if you will, that they're able to recall some of these memories. Regression therapy truth be told, it's controversial. Some people think that it's too suggestive, but we have dealt with strong professionals, people who are really professional about the way they go about the way they do things, and they take a lot of care and a lot of time to make sure that they do it right, and that the people that they're helping and they're doing these regressions with, they're helping them in a positive way. So, but there will always be people who say, regression therapy is absurd, and there's nothing we can do to change that.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the science is on that. I mean, you don't really hear much about it, But do you know any that part? Any part of it as far as that goes, or do you think it's still there is no science to it?
I think there, with something as complex as consciousness and subconsciousness, I don't know if it can be a finite thing. So it's more, like I said, it's more a matter of what we don't know we shouldn't discard. So the idea that we're exploring something that, so I guess my point would be is that people are like, well, hypnotherapy, a lot of people go through hypnosis to help them deal with something profound that's happened in their life, and that's acceptable. So if someone's dealing with a trauma from, their childhood where they may have been abused by a relative or a clergy member or a teacher, and then all of a sudden they go through this process, we kind of applaud that process is there to help people deal with the trauma. I would say the same thing apply. Why is this any different than that? Why would we look at this any differently and say, well, just because it focuses on the subjects of UFO and abductions and hybridization in children, well, that's a little bit too far. That's a little bit too much for me to handle. Well, right. If the same process is being used to help people in other areas of their lives, why would it makes perfect sense to me that we would use the same sort of tools and techniques to help people connect with these amazing and sometimes horrific experiences, traumatic experiences.
I'm glad you mentioned horrific, because I do want to talk about that at some point. But I spoke with Travis Walton about he had a regression done, way back, and he said he'll never do it again. Never. Some people have a lot of fear of that because they like the way it is tucked away and they don't want to know more. Do you find that with some of the people you've talked with? Or it seems like the people that were on the show, they all were very aware of what was going on.
Yeah. I think it takes courage to do that.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, especially when Yvonne's like, look, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going back in. I would think twice about it.
Yeah, and not everybody that we talked to had been regressed. Some of the people, Maren Maston in particular, she said, I'm thinking about it, but I haven't really done it yet because I don't know what I'm going to find out. But she's having, a lot of connections to things that have happened to her in her past and trigger events. And that's one of the things that we think, very well may happen with people who see this film. Because when we screened it at the Pasadena International Film Festival, and some of the people who have screened it to do interviews with us, they said that it triggered something that happened to them. They made a connection to something that they experienced that they had buried. and that there was a half a dozen people in the theater that night that were shaking at the end of the film because
Wow.
they were shocked by what it triggered, with their own personal experiences. So, anybody who's ever had a miscarriage, anybody who's ever had an abortion and knows what that sense of loss is, and they sit there and watch these people talk about having a child taken away from them. There's empathy there. They can connect to that. Females can connect to that energy in ways that men never will. And we've had a couple of people say to us, more than a couple, say that I am now questioning what happened to me at this point in my life because of what I have been exposed to in the film. I have now had experiences or remembering things that happened to me when I was much younger. And, part of that is that they're like, I had never, ever thought about this as something that would apply to me, but now I can't help but think about it.
Wow. The phone lines are open, and that number is 85-KGRA live, or if you'd like to dial numbers, that's 855-472-5483. And the line's open, and we do have someone screening the calls. Feel free to call in. You mentioned the word horrific, and I want to talk about that. And then, of course, before the end of the show, I want to talk about the possible seeding and what your thoughts were on that. And, of course, that is the name of your film. Horrific. Some people are saying it's an okay experience. Some people are saying it's horrific. And some people are claiming they see... like on the cover of Communion, by the way, the Whitley Strieber book. So many people have said on this show that picture on that book triggered something for them, and I bet I've had 10 people on this show say something about that book. So if people are saying, like I saw on your show, on your movie, that some people are saying that they're, there's reptilians. Some people are saying the Greys, but let's get into that in a minute. Right now, we do have someone on the line, and we have Jeremy. He's calling from Oklahoma. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Good. How you doing? Do you have a question tonight for our guests?
Yeah, I was just saying, I grew up in a little town outside of Silver City called Fort Baird, and I used to have these dreams that I was floating around the room, and they'd always let me go see my family, and then I'd go out the window, and that's the only thing I can remember. But and I've been into this for about 10, 15 years now, and I like y'all's show, and I just want to tell y'all I liked it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the call.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right. So right before Jeremy was calling, I was mumbling something. Did one of you? We have another call coming in, but we'll get that.
I want to make a comment about what Jeremy said, though. But
sure.
The fact that he was willing to pick up the phone and make that call and share his story is a big deal. Mm-hmm. It might not seem like it's the the keys to the kingdom and what it all means, and now we know thanks to Jeremy's call. But it's an indication that people are saying, I had an experience, and I'm gonna bring it up because what he shared is something that we've heard numerous times before from people both that we've interviewed face to face, but more so people who've reached out to us through Facebook and direct messages and email. So that is, I applaud him for picking up the phone, making that call, and saying, I appreciate what you guys are doing on the radio show because it helps people, and that's a good thing.
Wow, yeah, that is. I've actually heard people say that it's like an out-of-body experience, which I think is really fascinating as well. We have Eric calling from Boston. Eric, you're on the air. You have a question for our guest. Welcome to the show. He is gone. Okay, maybe he'll call back in. But that is when a situation like that happens, it must be hard to figure out what's going on when you wake up the next day. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, so we're talking about the different experiences that people are claiming to have, and some of them are really rough. a lot of times that people have talked about having telepathy with whatever these beings are, and there's never any words spoken. It's just like thoughts. Okay, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this, or calming them down, and so many things that people talk about are similar. You hear people talking about that, and the fact that they can't move at all. Of course, a lot of people will go back and say that's sleep paralysis and all that, but I don't know. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that in particular, the telepathy part of it?
Well, I think it's in almost every case, it's always telepathic communication. I don't think I remember. I'd have to think hard to remember a case where it wasn't. When someone's being abducted, it always seems to be a telepathic kind of communication that's occurring. And you're right, they say things like, relax, it's going to be okay. It's like they're calming them down. And there's a bit of what I would say is this telepathic, it's mind control. And that's how they're keeping people calm. They're also keeping them in some way sedated, where a lot of people can't move at all. Cannot move, totally frozen, cannot move a finger. So obviously there's a technology perhaps involved, but there's also a telepathic ability on the part of these ETs that they obviously can control us to a certain extent. And I know people don't want to hear that because that's horrifying. It's scary. But that's what we hear. We hear that in all these cases where people say, well, I was scared, but they told me to calm down. And then all of a sudden they looked me in the eye, they tapped me on the forehead, and I felt calm. I've heard that more than once. So they have some kind of control, and this could be an evolutional thing where they're certainly more evolved than we are. They're more certainly technologically advanced too. So yeah, so many questions. Eric is back with us. Eric, you're on the air from Boston. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. How you doing?
Doing
well.
This
is Eric, Boston. I'm actually the state director from MUFON in Massachusetts.
Oh, welcome to the show.
I think. Yeah, thank you. I think you noticed my comment in the text on the side. I'm curious about the fact that at one time I saw regarding Dr. Roger Leir, there was a supposed, and I even saw it on video, I saw images of it, a superconductor material that was supposedly stolen by a Roswell soldier. Someone stuck it in his pocket. And this got to Roger Leir. And I know I saw video or photographs of it, some kind of superconductor material. And the story I remember, the next thing I heard was that he or someone was going to present it at a conference, maybe in California. And someone was thrown in a van and driven like around the city for like 12 hours being told, there is no material. There is no material. It will not be shown at a conference. And sure enough, the whole story just disappeared. I never heard another thing. I'm wondering if you or the guests, and I really like the guests. These are two serious guys, I can tell. And Adam hearing to.
I want to jump in.
We appreciate it.
Let me just jump in real quickly. Eric, I will tell you that anyone listening to the show is welcome to email me at martin@podcastufo.com if you have any of that information, if neither one of our guests have ever heard anything about that. So I will forward that on. Eric, if you would, please take down that email address as well and email me. That's martin@podcastufo.com. So any thoughts on that from either one of you? Have you ever heard any part of that story?
I mean, we've heard so many different things that are very similar to that.
Right.
Yeah, even in Stan Romanek's case, he had a biological tracking or implant that was removed from his body, and it was confiscated. So, Stan tells the story. He has photographs of it. He has documented the photos of the journey that this one took through his body, where it started in his chest and went over to his side, and then it disappears. There are people that were involved in his case, specifically doing lab work, and had things, kind of, I don't want to say vanish, but they said that they were overwhelmed by what they were uncovering, to the point where they felt like, you know what, it's best that I don't get involved in this. So, what does that mean? And one of the things that we've learned on this journey is that we've spoken to people who I would consider to be very reputable people, connected to, I wouldn't say directly to the military, but dotted line connected to the military, and have shared things with us. I'm thinking of one person in particular where we were asking questions and thought we were like this close to getting a whistleblower moment. And he said, I need to check with my colleagues. And he named who they were. And to me, in that moment, I was like, that's a verification. Because the people he named were people that you would be like, well, if they were involved, then something's up here. So, but the feedback that I got, the follow-up from that was, this is probably not the right forum for this to be discussed. So, we've had things like that happen. Again, we're not like deep dive. We're not looking to disrupt the government and, get a bullet in our back. That's definitely not something that we're trying to do. We're just trying to educate people. So we're not on this mission to prove what's right and what's wrong and who's lying and who's not. We're on a mission really to help people feel more comfortable with, the fact that this might be real. But, the story that he shares is not an uncommon thing. I don't know any specifics on that story in particular, but, anybody that wants to do research, just Google that, and you'll probably find tons of information about it.
Right.
Yeah, and I just to add real quick, and that's why we talk about evidence or lack thereof. I mean, there's that factor of, maybe all the good evidence was confiscated. Maybe when, we always hear stories about people who either take some phenomenal photographs of something, or UFOs, or they have an experience and they're an eyewitness, and the next day they get visited by two men in black, right? Mm-hmm. These two guys that look like they're with the FBI or the NSA, or they're scary and they're not very nice people, and they're like, they talk to them and they say things to them to the effect of, yeah, you didn't see anything. Mm-hmm. And, like we talked about the Roswell people. So, where is the evidence? Well, I would say that there is evidence. And then I would say that some of that evidence is being kept. A lot of that evidence is being kept from us. If our government and the military, and I would add the ETs into that equation, if they don't want us to know, we will not know.
Yeah. Eric, thanks so much for the call. Sorry you couldn't answer that directly, but do email me, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, just one last comment. The takeaway from all that just struck me as, if the story was real, and it really sounded real to me, the takeaway was that physical evidence cannot exist. That's the rule. Mm-hmm. I get the feeling that that's the rule from the government or whoever controls the situation, that that physical evidence can't, like a picture. Now I get tons of pictures I've got to analyze and stuff, and a picture can always be faked. They can say any picture is faked, but when it comes to physical evidence, the rule is that can't exist. And if you come up with physical evidence, they step in and they quell the story.
I know. Actually, I do know a couple of cases like that. Ray Stanford is a really good case. When he had actually at the Socorro landing, there was a foot that scratched a rock, and he had that analyzed, and it disappeared. So anyway, Eric, thanks a lot for the call.
I thank you, Martin. Great to be there.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, we have Donna. Donna's on the line from Cape Cod. Donna, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
The show was fascinating, and I apologize. I haven't been listening while I was on hold, so if you've already addressed this, I apologize. But in addition to, speaking to the subjects I'm wondering if there was any contact with gynecological professionals going through history to sort of corroborate pregnancies and, to indicate, yes, there was a pregnancy and this person has repeatedly had these tests and so forth that, back in the day, some of these people did actually be documentation, that they had now you just have, something you do in the bathroom on your own. But back in the day, you could even see that they had been positive tests and that type of thing. So I'm just wondering if there had been any contact with those practitioners. And
Right.
I'll just, I'd also like to say that I support, what you're saying with this for the therapeutic aspects of this whole film. I think it's very helpful.
Are you an experiencer?
Well, it's possible. I'm in the realm of possibility. I don't know, but I've had experiences of some sort. So I keep an open mind.
Okay.
Great question, Donna. Thank you. That is
Well,
really... Go ahead.
Yeah, it is a good question. It's definitely one that we wanted to address in the film, but the unfortunate part of that is that we could find nobody that was willing to go on the record and talk about this. We had one physician in California that was, I would say that he, in conversations with me, he said, I have experienced this, I have seen it, I have no explanation for it. He said, I had seen cases where women were pregnant one day, and when they came in, they weren't. There were no signs of a miscarriage. There were, the baby vanished. The baby was gone.
No,
so
isn't that,
got
I'm sorry, before we move on from that particular topic, isn't that something that can actually happen naturally, like absorption?
Well, that's the one thing that we heard as well is, and I asked that specific question to him, and he said that is the standard, response to this is that, the bigger issue really is that there's not a lot of obstetricians that are really willing to go down the path of spending time and effort and somebody's money to have these tests done to kind of verify what has happened. We have heard numerous stories from women who have said that they go and get an exam and the doctors find scarring in their uterus, and they said, obviously you've had, some abortions here, and they're like, what are you talking about? I've never had anything happen to me. I'm coming here to visit you to find out what's wrong with me. So their immediate assumption is that, there were abortions, that something happened to them. But that is a common thing that women have heard, is that they have scarring in their uterus, a lot of scar tissue, and that there's the assumption from the physician is that there had been some sort of surgery done or extraction done.
Interesting.
Like the scar.
So let's, either one of you can do this, but let's lay out the whole situation of what these people are purporting that is happening to them as far as, inseminating and basically the seeding. What happens according to them?
Well, basically what happens in an abduction scenario is that someone's taken and they're examined, and they're poked and prodded, and they remember that they were in the case of men that there were sperm samples taken, and in the case of women that they know that they were doing gynecological tests on them. They were examining their reproductive organs and other things. They're taking skin samples, hair samples, blood samples, everything. So they're abducted, and then in many cases, and certainly in some of the cases with the women, they all of a sudden they're pregnant. And what's fascinating is we had one case, as someone who's in our film that's coming out, is that she was a lifelong lesbian. She has never been with a man her entire life.
I was going to ask something along those lines. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was she all of a sudden was pregnant, and she was in a relationship at the time with a woman, and it caused a problem because as much as the woman wanted to believe her, she was like, well, you must have slept with a guy, so you cheated on me. It causes a lot of problems in relationships, and the same can be said for a heterosexual marriage. It's well, wait a minute, we haven't had sex and whatever, and now you're pregnant, or it could cause problems like that. So anyway, they become pregnant in the first trimester. Somewhere along the way, towards the end of the first trimester, they feel like some will describe another abduction experience, something strange happening that evening where they felt very strange and woke up feeling very groggy, and all of a sudden, and they know the baby's gone. They go to the doctor. The doctor is what John just described. Doctors don't like to be at a loss for not being able to explain something, so they go back and say, well, your body absorbed it. But a lot of times they're like very perplexed, like, that's strange. So they'll always say that. They'll say, the way the women describe it is the doctor's like, well, that's very strange, but well, you know what? Your body must have absorbed it. But women know their bodies. Women know their bodies.
Is there which trimester does this generally happen?
First. So they're incubating early on, and then the baby's gone. But here's where it gets very interesting. Years later, it could be 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. They're abducted again, and they are taken aboard a craft. They remember going on a craft. They remember ET, whether it's a gray or whatnot, taking them into a room where there's all these children, strange-looking children, literally hybrid-looking children. Human, but not really human. They have really big eyes, really big heads, strange hair. And they automatically, these women know right away that because the child is brought over to them and they know it's their child. That maternal instinct kicks in, and it's extremely emotional for them. And when they tell us these stories, they are crying. It's very, very difficult. And they're told, this is your daughter, or this is your son. And they are often asked to nurture them, to love them, to hug them. And the thought behind that is that these ETs really can't give them that kind of maternal love that they need. So these women are actually shown their hybrid children. And this is what happened with Stan as well. It's not just women. The men, the sperm is extracted. They're not going through the pregnancies, obviously, but years later, then all of a sudden, in Stan's case, he's getting phone calls from these little girls, 6, 7, 8-year-old girls, 8 years after he was abducted, and these little girls telling him that I'm your daughter. And they're hybrids. So that's the basic, I would say, in a nutshell scenario, the things that the process that we see here when we talk to people. And John, if you want to add to that, any details?
The other thing that I would mention too is that both Geraldine and Niara and April all said that they also had penetrative sex with beings. So, one of the things that we can't begin to wrap our head around is all the different scientific and medical advances and technological advances that they may be able to use to create a living being in ways that we can't comprehend. We comprehend reproduction in the way that humans reproduce, and that there's intercourse, and that an egg is fertilized, and that turns into a fetus that eventually is born, and that's the process. But we've heard where there's been shared consciousness. There is extraction of just solely DNA. Sometimes it is an egg that has been inseminated by a husband or the father of the child, and then it is foreign DNA is introduced to it. So it is truly a union of human beings, but there is a third element introduced into the equation that affects the child. And we know of a handful of those. And Mary Rodwell has spent an awful lot of time over the last several years documenting the new human and what these children are. These amazing children are sharing in the stories that they tell, and the connection to outside of our existence. And unbelievable communication. We've had experiences just within the last month and a half, 2 months, with a child who is only 3 years old, and he's been sharing things that it is impossible for a 3-year-old child to know, specifically about us and to us. That has been like, this is impossible. It is impossible that a 3-year-old child would have the ability to share information that he knows absolutely nothing about. Impossible.
I guess
but
this
it's
is
eye-opening.
I guess this is the hardest part that I have of the whole situation. Like, well, we do have a caller. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But the first thing I think of, okay, so this hybrid or these hybrid children are on the craft. What are they doing? Just floating around all the time? I mean, what is their purpose? Are they like on another planet and come back and visit mom, or what's going on with that? And if you can make that kind of a short call, I'll pull in the caller right out. A short a note on that. What are your thoughts?
My response would be is that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what their existence is on craft. We don't know what their existence might be on other planets. They actually may be science experiments. And, Jack, I know, will probably bring up Rachel's Eyes and the evolution of the whole hybridization program that kind of started, back in the 60s and 70s. And where we are now is we don't have to hide the hybrid beings in public. They kind of fit in. So there are hybrid children who are living on Earth. There are hybrid children who are off planet. There are hybrid children who cannot function in an earthbound atmosphere. There are hybrid children who can. So again, this is what we're hearing. These are the stories that have been reported. Do we know if it's true? No, we don't, but we're listening.
Interesting. All right. Well, we have Ron calling from Minnesota. Ron, welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for the show, and great show and great topic. I had a question. Why is anyone abducted, or why is not anyone, like, for instance, I have never seen a UFO. All right. And I talked to a lot of people who have. I've talked to people that have had experiences with abductions, but I have not had one personally that I know of, that I'm aware of. And so why are certain people chosen? What is the parameter of the abduction?
All right, that's a great question. A really good question. What we found is, and no one knows for sure, again, we'll preface with that, but a couple of things that we found. A lot of times it runs in families. It's multi-generational. So we find out that a parent or grandparent was also abducted, and which suggests that it has something to do with DNA or blood type. Another thing we've noticed is that it's a lot of times it's associated with military families. So someone was in the military, the granddad, the grandfather, or the grandmother, we find out later, was in the military, or they were in the military, and the father or the mom was in the military. So there's this multi-generational factor associated with it. And yeah, I could say that, John and I talk about this. I don't think I've ever been abducted. John doesn't think he's ever been abducted. Not that we know of, but we're fairly certain we haven't been abducted in that way. Why? Well, maybe my blood type's not right. Maybe there's definitely a genetic component to this. So maybe they are working with people that they know that it's a better genetic match for them to do what they're going to do. Now, this is speculation, but those are the two things we have found, that there's a multi-generational factor, and there's also a military factor.
Yeah, you mentioned
and
blood type.
And I would say one other.
Go ahead.
One other thing I would say just before you jump into that. I know the Rh negative is probably on the tip of your tongue.
Yes.
The other thing I would say too is that abductions happen everywhere. It's not just the back roads of Appalachia. There's been this dynamic that has been shared for decades in the United States, in particular, that this is something that happens in the backwaters of the USA. Well, people are being abducted from remote areas, but they're also being abducted from skyscrapers in major cities. So there is a lot of storytelling that doesn't necessarily point to that you're a chosen one because of location. It usually has to do with a connection to something important, whether that be a military connection and potentially a result of family members being involved in a program that started back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and their children had been basically tapped to be followed. The Dan Sherman case is one of those where, he didn't realize that he had been chosen at a very young age and followed and monitored by a handler. And then when the time was to tap him on the shoulder and connect him to his story, then it happened. So he would be one example of a military story. But, the Rachel Zai story, again, another story connected to the military. But there's a lot of those military stories. Stan Romanek is connected to the military. One of the women that is in the film who is silhouetted, she wanted to protect her identity but was comfortable sharing her story and felt it was important to share her story. She found out much, much later, after she had these experiences back in the mid-90s for several years, that she had relatives that were involved in crash retrieval.
Wow.
She had no idea.
I have to tell you, Ron, thanks for the call. We are out of time. So, guys,
sorry, Ron.
Can you believe the show went so fast? Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And good luck with your film. It's out on September 3rd. Anywhere you can stream a film, you should be able to find it, right?
Yeah, go to extraordinarytheseating.com. You can see the trailer, and there are links in there for you to pre-order the film. And once the film goes live at 3 a.m. on September 3rd, 2 weeks from today, you will be able to click on that link, and it will take you to your preferred platform.
Excellent. And it's a film worth watching. I watch it myself. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we have a NASA scientist, Marian Rudnick, who is going to speak out about UFOs. That's in his own words. So that should be a great show. And I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. Alejandro Rojas, our two guests, and everyone else behind the scenes. And remember, everyone, to keep your eyes to the sky.
And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
There's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father, held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."